Welcome back to the content related to the neurophysiology of reward. This content will help set you up not only for your psychiatric material in the second year of your medical school curriculum, as well as for the material associated with illicit substance use and the underlying pharmacology by which those substances exert their effects. There are only two learning objectives for this content, which effectively splits the content into two parts. The first part is more about behavior and neurobehavioral impacts of reward. And then the second part is more about the cell signaling and the physiological molecular signaling that leads to the sensation of reward itself. We're going to begin with learning objective 1, which really talks about the neurobehavioral aspect of reward. Please bear with me. I know this information can be a little bit dry at times, and there's a lot of words associated with it. So please bear with me, and I hope that you find it useful. And if you have any questions going through it, please don't hesitate to reach out to me. Now, to set the stage for this lecture, we have to go through what I call terminology soup. Now, a lot of these terms are probably terms you're somewhat familiar with just in everyday life, but now we're really going to key in on the neurobehavioral definitions. The first is motivation. Now, you probably know what motivation means. It means the kind of intrinsic inward direction that everybody may have to accomplish something. Now, the neurobehavioral definition is that it is a process that mediates goal-directed responses or goal-seeking behavior to changes in the internal or external environment. A related term is reinforcement, and that is the consequence of operant, or another word for operant is learned, behaviors that alters the probability that a behavior will be repeated under similar conditions each time. Another word that you may be kind of familiar with is salience. You might have used the phrase salient features. Well, salience is by definition something important in the surrounding environment, and that something that is important is worth paying attention to. It can also be the attention-grabbing features of rewarding objects. When you think of salience, think of it as you see something and you want it. Now, things that have salience result in a heightened perception and focus on the part of the person, with their attention directed towards particular sights, sounds, smells, etc., other senses that are associated with a reward in a way that normally promotes well-being and survival. So essentially, to summarize in more simple terms, salience is, in normal circumstances, something good that's going to be good for you and is probably going to elicit a reward within the mind. And you have noticed some feature that of this item that indicates good things are coming from it. It's typically triggered by encounters with reward-related cues and experienced as surges of motivation to go out and obtain and consume whatever it is that you have noticed. This can last beyond the time the individual is exposed to that cue. So when we say that something has salience, that means that something has value to the individual, and so they desire to get it. And salience can be almost make the cues associated with the thing that you want almost as powerful as the thing itself. Here are some more terminology soup terms. Now we're getting into reward. Reward involves three things: the hedonic or the pleasurable effect, the euphoric effect of pleasure. 2, the motivation to go out and obtain something that is rewarding because of its value, and there's that salience again. And 3, the associated learning that goes along with those patterns. An opposite kind of term here is aversion. Aversion is a negative reinforcement. We talked about reinforcement on the last slide, but this is a negative reinforcement of behavior that an individual will learn to avoid in future encounters. And then finally, pleasure or hedonia. This is a subjective positive sensation, often referred to as euphoria or simply hedonia. It's something that is liked. The opposite term to that is anhedonia, which is a lack of interest in something that was previously liked. Or you can say you no longer like something that was previously pleasurable. And anhedonia is a prominent feature of depression, for instance. So down here in the bottom, the physiologic purpose of pleasure is to promote behaviors that are consistent with survival of the self and the species. These natural rewards are elicited by behaviors. They may include caring for young, palatable food, mating, and exercise or activity. Now we're going to talk about reward prediction error. To begin this section, I want to point out that dopaminergic neurons encode the discrepancy between what we predict will be rewarding and the actual reward that is received. It then broadcasts this signal or this discrepancy to other brain regions that are involved in reward learning. And this is one of the processes by which you learn what is rewarding, what isn't, and how much it is or isn't. The term associated with this is reward prediction error. That is essentially a difference or a mismatch between the events going on and the reward elicited from those experiences. So you can have first an unpredicted reward. Okay, so if you get a reward and you didn't know it was coming, it would be unpredicted. That elicits an activation essentially of brain arousal and other reward pathways. And we call this a positive prediction error. Now, a reward that is received and fully expected and therefore fully predicted elicits no response in terms of discrepancy. You can have a rewarding sensation, you can still get that euphoric response, but there is no discrepancy, okay, that was associated with it because events that reliably precede reward assigns value to the reward itself rather than just registering when the reward has occurred. So this is the kind of the, you know something is going to be rewarding and you get the appropriate amount of reward and then you learn the value assigned to the item itself. And then finally we have where you expect a reward, but you don't get any reward. We call that omission of a reward. That induces a depression in the system, and it is called a negative prediction error. When an illicit substance that induces a reward is first began to be used, it induces a positive reward prediction error, and that is the individual has not yet learned that the substance they are about to consume will induce so powerful of a reward. It takes time for the individual to learn that correlation between a substance and a powerful reward. So at first there is a positive reward prediction error. And those positive reward prediction errors, meaning that the reward is much higher achieved than was anticipated, this means that this would reinforce continued illicit substance use, especially around illicit substance cues and behaviors, in order to continue chasing that unpredicted reward prediction error, so in order to continue chasing that positive RPE. Contrast that with natural rewards, which over the course of your lifetime, there is a reward prediction error, but that error corrects itself, okay, until it becomes a neutral reward prediction error, meaning that with natural rewards, you understand, you intuitively learn at kind of an unconscious level what to expect in terms of a reward that matches or correlates with the activity or the food or whatever it is that is ongoing that elicits that reward. So this is important because when given a choice subconsciously between an illicit substance that induces a positive RPE and a natural reward which induces a neutral RPE, or more exactly, the sequence of events that precede consumption of the substance, or the sequence of events that lead to the natural reward, the individual will continually go back to the illicit substance in order to continually chase that positive reward prediction error. So why is that positive reward prediction error so powerful, and why do we really care about it? Well, when it comes to illicit substance use, that will pharmacologically increase dopamine in much more higher amounts than is endogenously possible without this kind of pharmacological manipulation of the limbic system. And it does so by increasing dopamine concentration in the limbic system, specifically an area known as the nucleus accumbens. We'll talk extensively about the nucleus accumbens later on in the second half of this content. But in short, the dopamine that is increased is 5 to 10-fold higher as a result of illicit substance use and the associated positive reward prediction error compared to the natural rewards, which are more of a neutral reward prediction, meaning there was no prediction error, it was neutral. Now, they can do so either directly by changing dopamine reuptake or dopamine release, and that's how some of these substances work. Others do so indirectly by modulating the receptors that maintain dopaminergic tone within the brain. And you don't need to know the exact mechanisms here. You don't even need to be able to categorize these for me at this point. I just want you to know that some of them work directly on dopamine, some work indirectly on dopamine, and I gave you some examples just so that you could kind of keep that in mind. You will learn much more about the mechanisms of all of these substances next year in your neuropsychiatric content. Now let's put this all together between reward prediction error and bringing it back to the idea of salience. And the glue that holds all of this together is dopamine. Dopamine is involved in so many aspects of reward, pleasure, euphoria, and it is involved in the prediction of reward and assigns salience subconsciously to the objects in our environment. And dopamine is really the mechanism by which this occurs. Again, we'll go over dopamine and the signaling in the second half of this content. But for now, let's compare pharmacological or an illicit substance with a natural reward and how this all fits together. First, a natural reward. Let's think about a natural rewarding activity such as exercise. So we know, go back to the definition of salience. Salience refers to a stimulus or an environmental change that grabs our attention and focus. In the event of a natural reward, such as exercise, we will learn that exercise has salient features and we will want to continue to acquire them because we will learn over time what happens. So, sequence of events here. 1, salience is assigned. 2, we have intrinsic motivation to go out and acquire something, in this case, go out and exercise. 3, we have a reward that is elicited by acquiring that object. That reward is elicited through dopamine. And then 4, the cycle repeats, and then learning takes place that every time you do this, you get this, or every time you eat this food, or every time you engage in this exercise or this activity, you get a reward, and that learning takes place. Contrast that with a pharmacological substance or an illicit substance use, where we have pharmacological increases in dopamine. This is not dopamine released by kind of our own brain's free will, if you will. We have a pharmacological manipulation of dopamine. We will have increased motivation to go out and acquire another pharmacological increase in dopamine. This will assign, rather than the pharmacological substance, it'll assign salience not only to that, but also to the environment and other sensory stimuli associated with essentially the external world around which that illicit substance was consumed. The cycle repeats, learning takes place even again. And then this also explains why there is a potential for relapse, particularly around the cues or the environment in which that illicit substance was consumed, because it's the environment now that has salience.